All right. Well, hey, good morning. My name is Ryan. I serve as the youth pastor here at Reach Church. What you just saw there on the screen, that just gives you a little glimpse, a little taste as to what we do every week at Reach Youth here every Wednesday night. You see on the screen, 6:30 p.m. This is our 6th through 12th grade ministry that takes place. I got to say, I'm honored. I love doing what I do. I'm honored to be a part of what God's doing. And I just got to say, can we give it up one more time for all the students that are involved with Youth Takeover today on stage and the video control room, hospitality, photography, all of those areas. I'm so proud of our students for serving in all the different ways that they're serving today. And one of the joys I get to have as the youth pastor is I get to see all the ways that God is moving in Reach Church, in Reach Youth on a weekly basis. And I get to see students from whenever they first start coming to Reach Youth and the growth all the way to whenever they graduate high school one day. And I was thinking about this morning, I was trying to think of, how could I tell a story or two of how God's been moving in specific students in Reach Youth? Because can I tell you, church, there's a lot of stories. I could stand up here and just tell you story after story, but I thought, you know what? Better someone else than me. How about I bring up one of our own students to share with you what God has done in his life these last several months. So Reach Church, can you do me a favor? Can we stand to our feet this morning, and can you give a wild, warm welcome to Sixto, one of our own students, as he makes his way on stage today. Dude, they love you already. Look at this. This is perfect. All right. Well, hey, I guess to kick it off a little bit, first of all, just so we can get to know you a little bit more, give us your name. I know I already said it, but give us your name, grade, school you go to currently, and then just something fun, like a fun fact about you. What do you like to do in your free time?
Yeah, so my name is Sixto.
By the way, spell that for us.
Sixto.
There you go. The first time I met him, I was like, what is it? Six toes? He's like, no. Just drop the S. Sixto. Oh, okay, got it. Cool. So Sixto.
I'm a senior at Valley High School, and on my free time, I like to play basketball, soccer, and hang out with family and friends.
Let's go. That's perfect. That's awesome. So give us just an idea. We'll talk about how you came to Reach Youth in a minute. But before you came to Reach Youth, Reach Church, give us some context. Like where were you at in life? Where were you at mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all that kind of stuff? Where were you at?
Yeah, so before attending Reach, I wasn't in the best mental spot or physical spot that I could be. I was trying to find a community that I could try to belong to. And by doing that, being with a certain community and different groups of friends, I started going out all the time Saturdays, going to parties, got involved in drinking, and slowly but surely, it just became like a weekly thing. And at the time, I just knew that slowly that it'll just not benefit me in the end.
Yeah, so we were talking, you were saying the more you were hanging out with these groups of friends, the more you were partying, the worse you felt over time. Like the worse you got mentally, the worse you got emotionally, all these sorts of things. I know you also said like you were just trying to find somewhere you fit in, trying to find your identity, your belonging. And so you're in that space. Now, how did you hear about Reach Youth? What happened there?
I heard about Reach Youth right after I had ended my soccer season. My friends Richmond and Sam, who also attend Reach, invited me out, and I was and they were just telling me like, oh, you should come, like it'll be a great time, and I was like, yeah, why not? Like, I'll come.
You'll give it a shot. Yeah. So you come that first Wednesday night. That was in May, right? It was just like 6-ish months ago. So end of May, you come to Reach Youth for a first time on a Wednesday night. Tell us what happened that night. What was your first experience like?
Coming to Reach, it was very welcoming, I will say. I just had a bunch of different people come up to me, talk to me, like, why am I here? What's my story? And a whole bunch of other different questions.
So you felt seen, like almost for the first time in church, right? Like you felt seen, valued, cared for. And I know you said like you felt like this was a place that you could belong. And so that's why you kept coming back week after week. So now let's fast forward. So you started in May. Fast forward in June now. What happens on a Wednesday night in June? Because God really moved on your heart.
Yeah, so in the month of June, instead of Pastor Ryan preaching to us, we decided that every Wednesday night that we would have students come up and preach their stories instead.
Yeah, like students came up and gave many messages, testimonies, and so that really touched you.
Yeah, and I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, But I just remember God coming over me, telling me that if I wanted to like take care of everything, like stop being fearful of everything that I've been going on, that I just have to follow the footsteps of Him.
Come on. So then that night we gave a moment to receive Jesus if you wanted to receive Jesus, and what happened?
I decided that I'd raise my hand, receive Jesus for the first time.
Come on. Can we give it up for that right there? That's what it's about, that moment. So you said a prayer out loud for the first time, accepting Jesus. Yeah. Now, at the time, youth camp was right around the corner. So you approached me, you're like, Pastor Ryan, I got to go to youth camp. And I'm like, let's make it happen. We brought 65 students and leaders to youth camp. You were one of them that came with us. And one of those nights at youth camp, really, God just wrecked you in the best way possible. Talk to us about what happened that night.
Yeah, so one of the nights at youth camp, we were just praying and everything. God finally spoken to me and told me that if I truly just want to follow His footsteps, that I should just like let Him take control, and that I need to stop being fearful of what I was going through, all the holding grudges that I was holding on to, just to let them go, and that's what I decided to do, and I was gonna finally follow His footsteps.
Come on. And I remember seeing you that night. You like had a new look in your eyes. You almost looked like it was a totally different person. And that night you also said, Pastor Ryan, I think I need to get water baptized, right? So that night you said that. And so a month later, August 28th, we kicked off the new school year. And right over there in a pursuit night, here's a picture, you getting water baptized for the first time. I think we have it. There it is. Before, during, and after. Look at that. That was a cool moment.
It was.
That was such an awesome moment, seeing you get water baptized like that. So just in a span of a couple months, just to recap, in a couple months, you were lost, drinking, trying to numb the pain, different friend groups, trying to find who you were, get invited to Reach Youth, you come back, you get saved, you go to youth camp, God does a work in your life, you feel set free, you're water baptized. So now just to kind of bring it home, how is your life so different now compared to what it was before coming to Reach Youth?
Yeah, so I've changed completely a lot. I mean, ever since camp, I've always dedicated to just try to come to church every Sunday and Wednesday.
And you're dedicated. You were here every Sunday and every Wednesday. Yeah. I love it, yeah.
And I've also just been having nightly prayers by myself, praying for my family, my friends, people that I meet throughout the day, and also just having a peace of mind, finally, that God will just take over and show me my way.
Come on, can we give it up for that? That's incredible. One more time, stand to your feet, nice and high. Let's give him Sixto one more great big hand as he exits stage today. Come on. That's what it's about right there, isn't it? That is why we do what we do at Reach Youth every single Wednesday night. It's just so cool to see what God's doing in the next generation, isn't it? God is on the move. That's just one story of so many stories that we could have shared with you this morning. Just real quick before we dive into the message, last month we had something else I wanted to celebrate before we went any further. We at Reach Youth throughout the year, we have several invite opportunities for our students to bring their friends. They're called One Night. And our students know one night is for the one. Which one? The one that is disconnected from God, the one that does not know Jesus. And last month, September, I think it was September 25th, the end of the month, here's a picture. We had almost 150 people at One Night in the Next Gen Auditorium. It was, when I tell you it was packed out, we ran out of seats. It was standing room only. It was so cool. We had 23 first-time guests that night. 23 students that have never set foot in Reach Youth were there that night. We had over 30 second and third time guests come back. And then here's the number I'm most proud of. 18 students gave their life to Jesus for the first time on this night. A little bit louder. Come on, we can give God more praise. That is what it's about. It was so cool to see. Even last week, if you were here last week, we had 23 more people get water baptized just last week. I think we have another photo of that too, just to showcase what happened. There it is. More water baptisms last week. 4 or 5 of them were students. So one more time, church, I just want you to know, God is on the move in the next generation. He's on the move with our kids, with our youth. It's exciting. I know I speak for my wife, Pastor Lydia, and I when I say we're honored to be a part of what God's doing in Reach Kids, Reach Youth. In case you don't know my wife, she is the kids pastor here. Her name is Lydia. We have been married for a little over 2 years now. It's kind of crazy. I think we have a picture of us as well on our wedding day. Everyone say, "Aw." That's us. I don't think I look any different, but that's okay. And going into marriage, I can just remember as we went into marriage, we talked about this through premarital counseling. We talked about the idea of serving each other, right? Putting each other's needs before our own, and we talked about splitting household chores. Yeah, responsibilities, things like that, right? And I'll be honest, looking back, there was one area I had this very unrealistic expectation going into it. And that was the area of cooking and meal prep. Okay? Now, for no other reason other than I knew she liked it. She was good at it. She enjoyed it. She was a cook. She was a baker, all in high school and college, all throughout the time that we were engaged. I knew she liked it. She was good at it. So I basically said, hey, I'll let you take over that area, and I'll just enjoy the fruits of your labor. That was kind of my thought process going into it, honestly. And as you can imagine, it did not take long as newlyweds for her to mention something in a very sweet way, saying, hey, Ryan, you know what would be really helpful is if you help me out a little bit every now and then with some meal prep, maybe cooking a meal or two, because at the time, all I could do was cereal and PB&J. So I can now safely say after 2 years, I can make more than just PB&J. I can even cook more than eggs and bacon. I have cooked a number of really yummy meals. Don't ask her what she thinks, but I think they've been really yummy. They've been really great. So, no, but for real, we've actually, at this point, we've learned to just meal prep together. We enjoy cooking together at this point. So I'm no expert, but I'm just saying I can cook a little bit more than what I used to 2 years ago. So that is a plus for me. But here's my point in saying this. I've learned so far in 2 years of marriage that marriage is not about me, but instead it requires something of me. How many know what I just said? Maybe if you're married or you've been married before, you know what I'm talking about. I knew this in theory going into marriage, but I think it's a whole other thing to practice it. It wasn't about me, but instead it actually required something of me. And believe it or not, this principle, it doesn't just relate to relationships and marriage. This principle also applies to something that we do here at Reach Church every Sunday. It's something that we do on a regular basis, and yet, unfortunately, I think oftentimes we don't fully understand, or we don't fully grasp, or we don't understand the true significance behind it. And it's something that we might have different backgrounds with, different experiences with, which then shapes different opinions, different thoughts, perspectives on it. What am I talking about? I'm talking about this 7-letter word called worship. Everyone say worship. By the way, I'm a youth pastor, so I like some feedback back and forth. So when I say the word worship, when you see that on the screen, I want you to think, what comes to mind? For me, I think of music. Who thinks of music or just songs in general, right? Yeah. Because I think it's easy in our Western culture to think of worship as another genre of music. So think about it. You got your classical, whatever you call it, country, unfortunately. You've got hip-hop. You've got what else is there? Jazz, bluegrass, all kinds of different genres of music. And oftentimes we'll lump worship in there as another genre of music. After all, I have a little worship playlist on my phone I listen to. Maybe you do as well. And if you think about it, what were we doing this just a couple minutes ago on stage? We were worshiping. There was a band. We were singing songs. So it makes sense. But with so many of us having different experiences, different viewpoints, even backgrounds with worship, different thoughts, preferences, I think there's some genuine questions that come up with this topic that we want to talk about this morning. Questions like this: who is worship really about in the first place? And is worship simply another genre of music? Is it just something that, is it confined to a moment on a Sunday morning or whenever we throw it on in the car? Or is there a lot more to worship than meets the eye? Is there a lot more to worship than we realize? And ultimately, this is the question that we want to ask. What does the Bible say about worship? What does God's word say about this? Because ultimately, we want to align ourselves with God's word more than any opinion or any preference in life. So, this is the primary phrase, I guess, that I want to communicate to us this morning. This is the main idea. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. But the main idea this morning is this. Worship is not about us, but instead it requires something of us. In fact, can we just repeat this and say this all together on the count of 3? It's good for us to say this out loud. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Worship isn't about us, but instead requires something of us. Just like I learned how in marriage, it's not really about me. It requires something of me. I've got to get involved. And guess what? The same thing applies to worship too, believe it or not. And if you're wondering, well, Pastor Ryan, how is this the case? I've never heard of this before. That's what we're going to break down together over the next few moments. And we want to start by looking at the Bible. We say this in Reach Youth every week, but our starting place is God's Word because it's the one source we have absolute truth to. We filter culture through the Word, not the Word through culture. That's what we say in Reach Youth. And so we're going to look at what does the Bible say about worship. Guess what? It turns out it's got a lot to say about it. And we're going to start in Romans chapter 12. This is the Apostle Paul writing to the church in Rome. We'll throw it up on the screen for you. Here's what it says. Romans 12, 1 through 2. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he's done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice. Someone say sacrifice. The kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Someone say worship. Then verse 2, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good, pleasing, and perfect. Okay, before we break this down, I want to ask a question to get you thinking. Why do you think sometimes we, or people in general, don't engage in a worship moment? Lots of reasons, right? There could be a ton of different reasons. Some examples could be, hey, we're going through a tough situation at work or at home with a family member, and so we're weighed down emotionally, we're weighed down mentally. That could be a reason. Or genuinely, sometimes we don't really believe that God can or will intervene into our situation because we haven't seen it yet, and so we don't enter in. Sometimes maybe it's a comfort thing for people. We don't feel comfortable engaging in some sort of way. So there's a lot of different reasons, but out of all of the reasons, I think the number one reason we don't engage in worship is this right here. We often have a divided heart. We have a divided heart between the things of this world and full surrender to God. Check this out, verse 1, look at it again. It says, give your bodies to God because of all he's done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice. Again, say sacrifice. Then he says, this is truly the way to worship him. Now, when Paul says this, he's not saying offer your bodies in this weird way as a sacrifice. What he's saying is offer your lives to God as a holy sacrifice. Offer every part of your life over to God in surrender. Saying, God, I want to please you with my actions. I want people to see you through the way that I live. God, I want to please you with my thoughts, with the words that I speak, with how I live, the entertainment that I consume, my behavior, my finances. It's every part. So let's define worship. In this context, what is worship? Here's what it is. You can write this down. Worship means this. It's the full surrendering of one's life to God. The full surrendering. Someone say full. It's every area. God, you can have your way in every area of my life, not just one or two. Because remember, we're talking about worship is not about us. Instead, it requires something of us. And what's the first thing it requires? Number one, Paul tells us it requires our surrender. Worship requires our surrender. Now, chances are when you hear the word surrender, we're all thinking of something similar, right? Something pops in your head. But let me give you the definition, because when I read this definition of surrender, it really hit me differently, especially whenever we're thinking about worship. So check this out. Here's the definition of surrender. It's to give over control or submit to authority. But it also means this. Check it out. To agree to stop fighting, stop hiding, and stop resisting. To agree to stop fighting, stop hiding, and stop resisting. So worship, it doesn't just involve us saying, God, you can have control, you can have access to every area of my life, but it also means, God, I'm going to stop fighting your direction. God, I'm going to stop resisting, stop hiding your nudging in my life. And not just one area, not just two or three, but in every. Again, say every area. Because we do this, don't we? We kind of pick and choose without realizing it, what we want to give to God and what we want to continue to do ourselves, our own way. It's easy to say, God, you can have your way in my marriage, but not my finances. God, you can have your way in my family, but I don't know about with my own entertainment at night. It's really easy to pick and choose, but full worship, true worship is saying, God, You can have your way in every area, from my finances to my marriage to how I parent, to my priorities, my character, how I speak, the places that I go. Because Reach Church, when we fully surrender our lives to God, check this out, that's when God's transformative power really begins to work in and through us. Ryan, how do you know that? Verse 2. Let's go to verse 2 again. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Reach Church, God's transformative power has a prerequisite. What is it? We first have to surrender. We first have to give him access. We have to give him access to every area of our life. Then and only then, when we give him access and control and we stop hiding, then can he bring transformation into that area. That's what happens. Here's what I found to be true in my own life. Maybe you'll agree. But sometimes we want the results of following God, but without the sacrifice of the surrender. Can we be real this morning? We want the results of following God, but we're not ready for the discomfort. We're not ready for the sacrifice. Every one of us in this room would say, I want God's favor. How many of you would say you want God's favor, his blessing upon your life? 6 people. Nice. Cool. No, who would say, I want God's favor? I want his blessing. I want his rewards upon my life, my work, my marriage, my job, my kids, my grandkids. We all want that, but we also like to stay comfortable. And the reason why I think we don't like the word surrender or sacrifice, especially in our Western world, is because oftentimes it means we have to give up of something of comfort. Who likes to be comfortable? I do. We like comfortability. We like convenience. We often live our lives with those two things in mind. Speaking of comfort, has anyone ever heard of comfort food before? Comfort food. So whenever I think of comfort food, I think of like the classic Southern style cuisine. You know what I'm talking about? Like mashed potatoes. Anyone like mashed potatoes? Okay, fried chicken. Any fried chicken lovers in the room? I love fried chicken. What about mac and cheese? Anyone like mac and cheese? What else is there? Chicken and waffles. There's biscuits and gravy, that sort of stuff, right? That's what I picture when I picture comfort food. And I guess I'm just a definition guy. I like definitions. I like clarity. I looked it up because I was curious. Here's the definition of what comfort food is, because it's not just limited to a cuisine. Check this out. It's someone say any food that makes you feel good temporarily, but isn't actually good for you long term. That's what comfort food is. Okay, so I want you to think in your head, what's your number one comfort food? What's the number one food that you go to feel good, even for a couple minutes? It feels good as you're eating it, but you know it's not good for your health long term. For me, it's cheesecake. Does anyone in the room like cheesecake? Yes. Okay, put this picture up on the screen. I don't know how anyone could look at this photo. Hang on, wait for it. There it is. I don't know how you can look at that and not want a piece. Like, that looks unbelievable. By the way, I'm not telling you I like cheesecake because I want people to go out and get me cheesecake. This happened last year. I said I liked animal crackers, and I had 15 people give me animal crackers the next week. I'm not telling you to go get me cheesecake. I'm just telling you this is my kryptonite. This is my comfort food. And I looked it up because, again, I was curious. Guess what the top 2 comfort foods are in America? Top 2 comfort foods. Ready? Number 1? Pizza. Oh, someone said chocolate. Good guess. Number 1 is pizza, actually. And number 2, mac and cheese. Those are the top 2 comfort foods in America. Who likes one of those? At least one of those. Raise your hand. Yeah, there you go. Now you know why it's top 2. But they call it comfort food. Why? Because it tastes good in the moment. And here's the principle that I want to draw from this. Listen carefully. Just because something is comfortable and familiar in your life does not mean that it is actually good for you. Just because something feels good in the moment. Can I tell you, oftentimes it's not helping, it's hindering, and it's hurting your relationship with God and the plan that he has over your life. If we're being honest with ourselves, there are areas of our life this morning that are acting as comfort food for us. There's areas of comfort food because it's familiar, because we've been consuming it for so long, but we haven't realized God's actually saying, hey, that's hindering you. That's hurting you, and it's actually keeping you from God's best. And before God can bring the transformation that we often want, what does he need? He needs access. He needs you to surrender. Someone say surrender. He's waiting for you to surrender your whole life to him. Every area, because we can say yes to Jesus and follow him for years, but without knowing it, we can keep areas to ourselves. It's really easy to keep some areas of ourselves and not fully give him direction. God, I want your transformation, but I don't know if I'm ready to give up that addiction yet. God, I want your transformation, but I'm not sure I'm ready to give up that sin pattern. The pornography, the gossiping, the entertainment choice, the lifestyle choice, what or who you are prioritizing. Because Reach Church, worship is not just confined to a song we sing. It's not confined to a genre of music or a moment on a Sunday. First and foremost, it requires us to surrender, give over control, and say, God, I'm not hiding. I'm not fighting. I'm not resisting your nudging any longer. I give you full control. Because there's probably areas that you're thinking of, God's illuminating right now in your life, but you're just afraid of the discomfort. You're afraid of the sacrifice. I was there too. Can I just encourage us with this, though? I felt led to encourage us this morning. The sacrifice is always worth the transformation that you receive from a life fully surrendered to God. The sacrifice and the surrender is 100% of the time always worth the transformation you receive from a life surrendered to God. Saying, God, I relinquish control. Not just this area, but every single area. Have your way. So I just want to ask you this morning, what area or areas do you need to surrender to God? Maybe it's a sin pattern. Maybe it's not even a sin pattern. Maybe it's just an area of comfort. It's a comfort food for you. And God's saying, hey, I need access. If you want transformation, if you want to see me move in your life, then I need access to that first and foremost. Worship's not about us, but instead it requires something of us. And the first thing it requires is, number one, our surrender. Then here's the second thing. Number two, worship also requires our physical body. I love this one. This is actually one of my favorite ones, and I'll tell you why in a second. I want to read of one of my favorite stories in the book of Acts. And before I read it, I've read this story about a dozen times in my life, but just recently, God really illuminated something in this story I wanted to share with us this morning, because it really shifted and changed the way that I approached and I thought about worship. So before we go into it, quick context, before we dive into the passage, there's these two guys named Paul and Silas. Say Paul, say Silas. So Paul and Silas, they're traveling from town to town, city to city. They're preaching Jesus left and right. They're praying for miracles, for healings. They're seeing people be set free from evil spirits. And there's this one moment where there's this woman who has an evil spirit in her. And she's following Paul and Silas. They're getting annoyed by her. They turn around. Paul cast out this evil spirit from this woman. The only problem was this woman had a master who was using her as income. She was a fortune teller for him, so that's how he was making his money. So when Paul cast out this evil spirit, now this master's angry. He's got no income. So here's what he said. Here's what happens. He tattles on Paul and Silas in Acts 16:23. Check it out. Here's what happens next. They, meaning Paul and Silas, they were severely beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered, check this out, to make sure that they didn't escape. So the jailer put them in the inner dungeon and clamped their feet in the stocks. That's an important detail in the story. You'll find out why in a second. Verse 25, around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. Don't miss that. And the other prisoners were listening. Verse 26, suddenly there was a massive earthquake and the prison was shaken to its foundations. All the doors immediately flew open and the chains of every prisoner fell off. Okay, I want you to picture yourself as Paul and Silas for a second. You're in their shoes. You were just beaten up. You were just attacked by an angry mob for essentially doing nothing wrong. You're thrown into jail. In fact, you're thrown into the innermost cell out of the entire jail. It's cold. It's dark. It smells bad. You don't want to be there. If it were me, I'll be honest, I'm probably moping at this point. I'm probably maybe crying a little bit. Who knows? I'm frustrated. I'm angry. I don't want to be there. And out of all of the things that Paul and Silas were probably feeling and the things that they could have done in this moment, they didn't throw a pity party. The Bible doesn't say that they got angry and they did whatever. No. What does the Bible say? They start singing in the middle of that cold, dark, uncomfortable jail cell. At midnight, they start singing hymns. They start singing worship songs to God. They're using their physical body. They're using their voice to sing out to God despite what they're facing in that moment. And what's the result? The chains that they were bound in all of a sudden broke loose and everyone else around them in the jail were set free. Okay, why is this important? Notice the text says this: as they were worshiping in the innermost cell, the text says the other prisoners were listening to them. The text is almost saying, it's implying their worship had an impact on the rest of the jail in that moment. So Reach Church, I want you to know that your worship does not just impact you, it impacts the people around you. It does not just impact you. It impacts the people around you. Your prayers, your worship, the way that you pursue and you actively go after God, it can have a major effect, and it can lead someone else around you to the feet of Jesus as well. Let me give you a personal example. Growing up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I remember specifically at the church that we were in, there was this one woman. She was serving every week faithfully as a greeter. She always had a smile on her face. Everyone loved her. Her name was Amy. Everyone say Amy. She was great, but what made Amy so awesome was not her bubbly personality. It was not her smile on her face. Really what made Amy so special was she was born with an extremely rare condition where her arms and her legs didn't grow properly. In fact, she was born without arms and without legs. So all throughout life, she had to get around on a motorized chair, and she had to learn to use 2 prosthetic arms for everything she did. How many of you would say this sounds like a challenge? This sounds like a pretty big obstacle. Yeah. So as you can imagine, she had to relearn everything. Even the simplest things that you and I do every day without giving second thought to are really difficult for Amy. Things like getting out of bed in the morning, brushing her teeth, brushing her hair, going up and down stairs, opening drawers, pouring a glass of water. The things that we don't think about are so hard for her. And this is why I'm saying this, despite all these challenges and the circumstances that she was handed, what I love is she didn't turn bitter at God. She didn't turn bitter at the world and the people around her. Not only did she serve every Sunday with a smile on her face, and she loved doing it, but here's why I'm saying this. After serving, she would wheel herself up to the front row of the auditorium. And I remember as a middle schooler looking at her and seeing her lift up her prosthetic arms in the middle of a worship service. And it really touched me because I thought, man, if someone who's been dealing with what she's been dealing with for however long in her life, if someone like that can find a way to use her physical body to engage in worship, then I can too. It challenged me in my own way of worship, in my own way of going after God in a really significant way. And I'm saying this to tell you, you never know how your physical act of worship can inspire someone else around you. Just by you raising your hands, just by you lifting up your voice, it can inspire someone else and boost their faith. One of the reasons I love Paul and Silas so much is because their choice to worship, and it impacted everyone else in that jail cell. And I say choice for a reason, because the last thing I want to say is worship is a choice. It's not a feeling. Worship, say it's a choice. Worship is a choice. It's not a feeling. If you had the kind of day that Paul and Silas had, you would not feel like worshiping either. You would not feel like lifting up a song of praise as you're shackled to the ground of a jail cell. But despite how they felt, they chose to give God worship anyways. They chose to worship. And Reach Church, please get this. The result of their worship was they were freed from the shackles and the chains that they were bound in, and everyone else was bound in around them. And I know in a room like this, there are people in here that have chains that feel shackled, held down. They're chains of addiction. They're chains of depression, anxiety. Maybe it's guilt or shame over your past. Maybe it's comparison. Maybe it's needing the approval of other people, and you feel so weighed down. Can I just encourage and challenge you? Maybe what you need is to get before God and actively engage in worship in a way that you've never done before. What if that brought freedom into your life? What if that did for you what it did for Paul and Silas in this moment? What if just your act of worship alone is strong enough to break the chains that have you bound in life? And it's not because of what you're doing, it's because the God that you're singing to. And it's the God that you're worshiping to. It's not a feeling. It's a choice. And can I also say this idea of using our physical bodies to engage in worship, it's not personality-based. It's not a comfort thing. It's a biblical thing. I don't have time to go through all the words right now, but in the Old Testament, there's a lot of Hebrew words that define how we should worship, how God instructs us to worship. Let me give you some of these as an example. All of them use our physical body in some way, shape, or form. One of them means this. It means to hold out or extend a hand of praise, thanking God. Another one means holding out and extend a hand of praise, believing for something not yet to come. How many of you have something that you're believing God for that hasn't yet to come? I know I am, right? Another word means this. It's a song of praise. It literally means just using your voice to sing and declare praise to God for what he's done. Another one means exuberant praise. It means dancing, using your body to express how much gratitude you have for God. Another one is to kneel down on your hands and your knees and prostrate before the Lord. Notice all of these words have something in common. They all use our physical body in some way, shape, or form. Every single one of them. Worshiping in this way, I want to encourage us today. It's not just reserved for extroverts. It's not just reserved for a certain personality type. It's for you. It's for me. How many introverts are in the room this morning? I'm an introvert, believe it or not, okay? I love my me time. I love my alone time. I get energy from that. And I'll be honest, in elementary school, middle school specifically, I was that kid who really liked to be alone. I didn't really enjoy being in a worship atmosphere where there's a lot of people going after it and worshiping their hands and singing. So I thought, man, that's not really my thing. I want to be true to who I am. And I remember just tussling and wrestling with God about this over and over again until finally there was a worship service on a Wednesday night where all these students and all these leaders were saying, raise your hands. And I just didn't feel like it. I was just being stubborn. There was this pride in my heart. And honestly, I was like, this is just not who I am. I don't want to be inauthentic to who I am. But in this moment, I felt so strongly God was saying, just lift up your hands. And so I was like, you know what, whatever. I lifted up my hands, reached church, I started bawling. I started weeping. And it wasn't because I was sad, it's because I was so overwhelmed by the presence of God in my life. So honestly, for the first time in a worship moment, I was bawling, I was crying, and I've never looked back. This is what challenged me. These Hebrew words, to worship, it doesn't just mean surrender. It also means, hey, use your physical body to get involved and to show how much you love God. Too many times, I think we don't engage into a worship moment simply because we just don't feel like it, or because we've had a rough week. We've had something that took place. And so we turn into a spectator rather than a participant. Or I've also heard people say this, like I thought in middle school. Well, I want to be authentic to who I am. And so if that doesn't feel comfortable to me, then I'm not going to engage in that way. Let me just break that myth for a second, because we should not be confusing being fake for acting in faith. Those are two very different things. Don't confuse faith for inauthenticity. Can I tell you, it is not disingenuous to worship and praise God even through a trial, even if you don't feel like it. It's not disingenuous to call upon the power of God with your voice, even if you've never done it before. It's not disingenuous to step outside your comfort zone and do something that you're not familiar with or how you were raised, and you take a step and you lift up your hands in worship. Can I tell you, that's not disingenuous. That's faith. That's worshiping in the way that the Bible instructs us to worship, and there's power in that. I can say that confidently because of what it's done in my own personal life. Just because you've never done it and it's outside your comfort zone doesn't mean it's disingenuous. Doesn't mean it's inauthentic. And I say this with love, but myself included, when have we made worship about us in the first place? When have we made worship about how we feel? When have we made worship about our circumstances or our situations or our personality? Now listen, I'm not trying to downplay anything that you're going through right now. You could have walked in this morning dealing with some really heavy stuff. I'm not downplaying any of that, but I think too many times we make the mistake of allowing our personality or our circumstance to dictate how we feel, and then we allow how we feel to dictate how we worship. And so we stand back. We're a spectator. We're a bystander rather than a participant. And can I just tell you, that's probably where the enemy wants you to stay. The enemy wants you to stay there. Why? Because there's freedom that happens when you step outside of it. There's a freedom from the shackles and the chains that Paul and Silas were bound in. Think about if they wouldn't have worshiped in that way. The story probably wouldn't even be in the Bible. Why? Because there's not worth saying anything about it. As long as we are allowing our circumstances and our feelings to dictate how we worship, I believe we will never experience the freedom that God has for our lives. There's a freedom that's released. There's a freedom that we access when we respond in this way. So sometimes worship requires something of us, and it's not just our surrender. It's saying, God, I'm going to get involved with my physical body. I'm going to sing the words out loud. It's not just a mind or a heart thing. The Bible is clear about that. Using our words, using our voice, using our hands, our arms, our bodies. I believe, like I said, there is such a freedom that God wants for you. And oftentimes it just means we step outside our comfort zone a little bit. Worship's not about us. It requires something of us, and it requires our surrender, and it requires us using our physical bodies. Can I just get you to think about this? What would unlock in your life if you decided to operate in this way? What would unlock in your life if you decided to look at worship as I'm surrendering my whole life to you, God, every area? When it comes time for worship moments, I'm not just going to be a bystander. I want to get involved because because you never know what domino effect it's going to have in a moment of worship by you getting down on your hands and your knees and you're singing out to God. He can do more in one moment than you can do in a lifetime. And so we're going to end this morning by practicing this together. But before we do, can we all slowly and quietly, can we stand to our feet together this morning as we get ready?